On November 14, 1977 at 7 a.m., a military alarm sounded at several Soviet air defense regiments. 4 MiG-21s and 2 Su-15 interceptor aircraft were urgently scrambled to intercept an aerial target, which was an enemy surveillance balloon. This type of combat mission, although hard to complete, was in a way a usual routine for Soviet fighter pilots, as dozens if not hundreds of US surveillance balloons had been entering Soviet airspace around that time. However, this time the routine mission ended in a quite unusual way, resulting in a wounded elderly man and a damaged workshop on the ground and a shot-down balloon which turned out to belong to the Meteorological Service of the USSR. The topic of today's video, the ridiculous Soviet interception of a surveillance balloon in 1977, came to my mind due to the anniversary of a very interesting event that occurred just 3 years ago, back then one of the most discussed stories in the world. I'm referring to the so-called 2023 Chinese balloon incident, which happened in February of 2023. Now, I know this may not be the introduction you expected for a video about a Soviet incident, but give me a minute and hear me out, as I want you to learn the history of Soviet aviation not only for entertainment but for educational purposes as well, so you can actually apply these lessons to real-life situations. So to briefly remind you, in February 2023, a high-altitude balloon identified as Chinese all of a sudden appeared over US territory. Over several days it drifted across multiple states before finally being shot down over the ocean by an F-22 fighter aircraft. Interestingly, according to certain Russian news channels, a 20-meter-long missile was fired at the balloon.
Применение штатами военной силы назвали явно чрезмерным. На шар размером с 3 школьных автобуса направили 20-метровую ракету. Мол, иначе аэростат не победить.
Which is quite impressive, considering the F-22 itself is only about 19 meters long. Anyway, today it's not the Russian news that I want to talk about, but rather the source from which the Russians copied that image, bluntly and incorrectly as always, namely from the Fox News channel. Many American citizens back then were understandably wondering why the US Air Force took so long to shoot down what was a huge but in essence just a primitive balloon. There was of course an official explanation from the Pentagon saying that shooting down the balloon over the continental US carried the risk of debris falling down onto people below, but Fox News quickly labeled this explanation as laughable.
The administration says it is too much of a risk to shoot the balloon down. They say they are worried that debris might hit a population zone.
The real culprit, of course, was said to be Joe Biden, who didn't interrupt his vacation and didn't order the balloon shot down right away no matter what, thus showing the US to be a weak country not only in the face of China, but also in the face of, quote, America's number 2 geopolitical foe, Russia.
Joe Biden is still refusing to supply Ukraine or allow Europe to supply Ukraine with the fighter jets that they need to win the war against Russia. So make no mistake, there is something deeply wrong with the president that is quick to call Republicans a threat to the country, but will not stand up to Russia or even take action against a Chinese reconnaissance spy balloon flying over U.S. military bases.
Now, 3 years later, there is another US president in the White House. I'm not going to discuss how Donald Trump addressed those matters, which apparently used to be important to Fox News hosts and viewers. All of that has already happened. Instead, I want to talk about what did not happen back then in 2023, but might have, had, as Senator Marjorie Taylor Greene suggested, Donald Trump been in office and immediately ordered the balloon shot down. Of course, to answer that question, I do not possess the gift of seeing alternative pasts, but I do possess the ability to remember Soviet history. I hope that one day someone will create an interactive archive of Russian history where people can test any government solution without the need to test it in real life, because Russian history is full of idiotic decisions of various kinds, unfortunately tested on real people's lives. In such an archive, the question, what could happen if you give aviation a thoughtless order to shoot down a balloon over your country, would likely point to a story from the USSR in 1977. This story was accidentally found in old KGB document. one of many that were declassified in Ukraine after it gained its independence. It's a bit of an unusual source for such an aviation story, as it was found in a regular daily report of the Ukrainian KGB. The story of the balloon interception is placed right between a report about Soviet children shooting at a car with passengers and the report on the death of 36 cows due to the poisonous chemicals in their food. You know, just normal, regular events from the golden time of the USSR, so nostalgically remembered by many Russians today for its seeming overall order, safety, and quality of life. To be fair, the US balloons were indeed, though unpleasant, yet a regular part of life for both the military and ordinary citizens. In one of my previous videos, I mentioned my children's book. It was meant for preschool reading, but since this was the USSR, it also laid some ideological foundations for the future Soviet citizen. Thus, alongside fairy tales with cute squirrels, rabbits, and foxes, there were also tales about the army and war, the honor of self-sacrifice for the motherland, and of course stories about Lenin spending time with children whom he liked to meet alone in the forest. I have to say I never liked those stories even back then, but today they sound even more creepy. Anyway, one of these stories in that book was about an enemy spy balloon. This story is about a boy whose father, presumably an air defense officer, proudly explains to him how they detected and destroyed an enemy balloon. In reality, though, things were far more complicated. As I discussed in my previous video about the Soviet airborne laser, the Beriev A-60, developed in the 1980s specifically to counter high-altitude balloons, shooting down a balloon was an extraordinarily difficult task. To begin with, they were difficult to detect due to their low radar signature. But even when detected and visually found by fighter aircraft, they were anything but easy targets to shoot down, despite how simple that might appear at first glance. The missiles had a hard time locking onto the thin, almost transparent envelope, while aiming the gun was difficult due to the aircraft's poor maneuverability at high altitudes. But even if the pilot managed to score a hit, the damage was often not fatal. The irregular fuses on the munitions simply didn't work, and the projectiles would simply puncture holes in the thin envelope, allowing the balloon to descend slowly over days or even weeks. Eventually, the Soviets developed a special type of anti-balloon munition, which included a cannon projectile with a super-sensitive fuse that would explode upon contact with the ultra-thin balloon envelope, and with raindrops as well, by the way. It of course improved the chances of successful interception, though not that much. Between 1956 and 1977, Soviet air defense detected more than 4,000 reconnaissance balloons, out of which only 793 were shot down, which is less than 20%. Destroying a balloon was so difficult that such missions fell into the so-called drill a hole in your jacket category, meaning that a confirmed success would earn those involved a military order, which, unlike medals, required an actual hole to be drilled into the uniform jacket for it to be mounted. And perhaps thoughts of such a reward crossed the mind of whoever gave the urgent order to intercept a surveillance balloon over Soviet Ukraine in 1977. According to the KGB document I mentioned earlier, on November 14, 1977 at 7 a.m., Soviet air defense radars detected an identified balloon crossing the western border of the USSR in the Chernivtsi region in present-day Ukraine. Not long afterwards, 4 MiG-21 fighters and 2 Su-15 interceptors were scrambled to intercept. To the radar crew's credit, they located the balloon precisely and managed to perfectly lead the fighters into firing position. As stated in the report, the pilots shot at the balloon with missiles and cannons, observing multiple hits on the balloon and noting visible damage and falling debris. However, despite these hits, the balloon, although descending, continued drifting deeper into Soviet territory. But as later became known, no less impressive actions were happening on the ground below. According to the KGB report, around 11 a.m., while the fighters were shooting at the balloon over the village of Sinivka in the Sumy region, which is roughly 700 kilometers from the Soviet border, 6 explosions of aircraft munitions were recorded on the ground. 3 landed harmlessly in the field, 1 exploded in a village street, another struck a workshop in the village, causing some damage. Meanwhile, the 6th one wounded a 70-year-old man, Fyodor Yevtukh, who was then urgently raced to the hospital. Despite this, however, the report concluded that the situation in the village is normal. You know, nothing special, just an ordinary Monday in the USSR. But that wasn't all to this story. On the one hand, the interceptor mission could be deemed successful. You know, harm to their own civilians was never a factor in Kremlin evaluations, and the balloon was eventually shot down. It was found 400 kilometers from Senivka, near the city of Voronezh, which was already in the territory of Soviet Russia. Here I can't help but note the amazing symbolism of having the city of Voronezh in this story, given that the city later became a widely popular meme, "Let's bomb Voronezh," referring to self-destructive actions in which Russia harmed its own population to look strong and powerful for its enemies. The follow-up KGB report from the next day had good news and bad news. The good news was the confirmation that the balloon had been shot down and had fallen to the ground just 6 miles from Voronezh in the village of Lyapino. The bad news was that the recovered fragments bore a clear inscription, "Made in the USSR." As it appeared, the balloon turned out to be a Soviet meteorological balloon, which, by the way, was specifically equipped with a radar reflector to facilitate radar tracking, which apparently explains the perfect performance of the air defense radar crew in issuing directions to the intercepting pilots. As the KGB reported on November 14th, the Ukrainian Meteorological Service, in order to prepare its regular daily weather forecast, launched 36 balloons from 9 stations, including the city of Chernivtsi, precisely where air defense first detected the intruder. As usual, the Meteorological Service had notified all airports, civil aviation authorities, and military headquarters, including the commands of the 17th Air Army and the 8th Air Defense Army, the very units that ultimately shot down the balloon and caused damage on the ground. This was the level of order and safety in the USSR. Even in its supposedly best times, the golden era so many Russians nostalgically dream of restoring. Though, considering the current state of life in Russia, that would indeed be a monumental improvement for the country. As for the real-life application of the historical lesson I promised at the beginning of this video, you see, when someone proposes a very simple solution to a highly complex problem, and that solution suddenly feels so obvious and unquestionably right to you, despite you having no professional expertise in the field whatsoever, then you should know that there is an extremely high probability that properly fixing that important problem was never that someone's true objective. And the consequences of failing to understand this lesson could be much worse than balloon debris falling onto your roof. And there is basically just one solution to this problem: broaden your horizons. Never stop learning about new subjects. For example, I may know a great deal about Soviet aviation, but it turns out I knew almost nothing about the Soviet Navy. Only recently did I learn that the Soviet Alpha-class submarine, that sleek, menacing villain in so many Hollywood movies about the USSR, was in reality one of the most expensive, impressive, and terrifying failures in Soviet naval history. But there is of course much more to this story, which you can explore in the first episode of the new series Unsealed by Mustard, available exclusively on my streaming service Nebula. Nebula is where you can watch hours of exclusive videos you won't find anywhere else. From the aforementioned Mustard, creators like Real Engineering, Vendover Production, Real Time History, and humbly myself. What makes these videos different is that on Nebula, creators can go beyond the limits of YouTube with longer run times, deeper analysis, and the freedom to explore virtually any compelling topic without fear of restrictions. But when you sign up for Nebula, you're not just getting access to more videos. Unlike anywhere else on Nebula, you are directly funding these kinds of ambitious, high-effort projects that otherwise could never have been made. You see, Nebula is not like any other platform, as it was built by creators and is owned by creators, myself included, which makes it the most sustainable way to support our work. When you sign up using my link in the description, I receive a portion of your subscription fee for as long as you stay subscribed. That support helps us improve our content, and for you it means no ads, no sponsorship messages, just thoughtful, high-quality content. So if you want to support my channel and start enjoying Nebula, go to nebula.tv/paperskies or click the link in the description or scan the QR code to sign up and get 50% off an annual subscription. That's just $30 for the whole year. And if you don't want to deal with yet another streaming platform subscription, you can sign up for a lifetime membership, paying once for unlimited access forever. So click the link and watch the incredible episode Underwater Fighter Jet now on Nebula.